Hello, everyone, and welcome to the book launch of Mutual Accompaniment in the Divine Ruah on discernment and spirituality at uncertain times. I am delighted to be here with you today to celebrate this remarkable book by Carlos Mendoza Álvarez and Juan Lapuente-Tapia, two renowned theologians and spiritual guides. This book results from an epistolary dialogue between the authors who share their insights and experiences on how to live a spiritual life amid uncertainty, horror, and global violence. They invite us to let ourselves be moved by the divine Ruah, the breath of God, who animates us to accompany each other in friendship, mutuality, and resistance. The book is also enriched by the illustrations of Paulo Medina and the preface of Carmen Margarita Sanchez de Leon, who add their own perspectives and contributions to the conversation. This book is a gift for anyone who is seeking a deeper understanding of discernment and spirituality in our troubled times. It is a book that challenges us, inspires us, and comforts us. It is a book that invites us to join the feasts of the divine Ruah, where we can find hope and joy in the midst of suffering and struggle. I hope you will enjoy reading this book as much as I did, and I really look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions during the Q&A session. Thank you for being here. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Carlos and Juan Carlos to the stage. I am honored by the generosity of Susan Abrams and James Allison, who are joining us launching this book, which we now invite you to engage. Carlos is trying to come and join us. He's having some technical difficulties, but he'll soon be with us. So before I give you the stage, I want to briefly advertise our endeavor. I want to invite you to support Alios Ventos Ediciones, a non-for-profit organization that publishes open access books in various fields, such as humanities, arts, culture, and education, philosophy, theology, and the case is today, spirituality. Our books are of interest to scholars, researchers, students, and general readers who benefit from open access to books, and those who value the promotion of humanities, arts, culture, education, science and technology, the support and defense of human rights, the promotion of gender equality, and the promotion of civic activities. So Alios Ventos Ediciones is a mendicant and convivial community of creators and researchers who publish independent, rigorous, beautiful, and visible books in various fields such as humanities, arts, literature, culture, theology, and spirituality. We promote contemplations, the intelligence, and the transformation of the world and the person through the recognition, the mutual recognition, and the dialogue. And we want to propose to you a pilgrimage towards the sources that will allow us to glimpse hope at the end of times. So we invite you to donate to Alios Ventos Ediciones, and that way to contribute to cover the costs of editing, design, printing, distribution, and promotion of our books. You can also help us support our authors and illustrators. You can help us by joining our Patreon or by making a one-time donation using our PayPal or wiring it to our bank account. So without further ado, let us head into this conversation. In times marked by uncertainty, horror, and global violence, this dialogue invites us to let ourselves move, that's discernment, and be moved, spirituality, by the divine Ruah in friendship, in mutuality, receiving in our own wounds, often hidden, the wounded stories of those who courageously confess their deepest rebellions and aspirations from the invisible margins and discarded by power. In this four-hand book, which collects the epistolary dialogue between Juan Lapuente-Tapia and Carlos Mendoza Álvarez in conversation with the illustrations of Paulo Medina and prefaced by Carmen Margarita Sanchez de Leon, the authors invite us to embody each other through mutual accompaniment, because our bodies, as if they were ancestral sounding boards, harbor an infinite number of wise transgressions that persist and creatively re-exist with Mother Earth in the face of the violation of our deepest aspirations and rebellions by the hegemonic powers. The dialogue collected in the spaces explores paths of communication that emerge from belonging together in liberating spiritual friendship, where the diversity of our spiritualities embraces our vulnerabilities and enlivens the courageous steps that global challenges demand of us to unite the knots of rivalries that lead to violence. Spirituality and discernment lead us towards the friendship offered from the ignored margins to reimagine a world in which many worlds can fit, a new birth together in a new time and a new land. We'll first invite Susanna Abrams to participate. She's professor of theology and postcolonial cultures, VP of Academic Affairs, and Dean of Faculty at the Pacific School of Religion. Her teachings and research explore the postcolonial religious practices. She is the author of Identity, Ethics, and Nonviolence in Postcolonial Theory, a Ranherian Theological Assessment, published by Palgrave Macmillan, and she's co-editor of Shoulder to Shoulder, Frontiers in Catholic Feminist Theology, published by Fortress. Her publications and presentations weave practical theological insights from the experience of working as youth minister for the Diocese of Mumbai, India, with theoretical perspectives from postcolonial theory, cultural studies, and feminist theory. Ongoing research projects include issues in decolonizing theological education and formation, interfaith and interreligious peace initiatives, religion and nationalism, global Catholicism and Christianity between colonialism and postcolonialism. She's the president of Concilium Theology Journal and an influential theological outlet. Susan, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your invitation. Very kind. It's so wonderful to see old friends, especially Juan Carlos and Carlos. I must start by saying that these are my siblings. These are my brothers from another life that I know in some deep way outside of this space and time. And I felt that right away. You know, I met Carlos years ago at a concilium meeting in Frankfurt, and before we knew it, we were having a deep friendship. And Juan Carlos, I think, you know, it's like you just blew into my life, and then I was like, I can't remember my life before I met you. I really cannot. It's a very odd experience. What I loved about this book is the celebration of that intimacy of friendship. And to remember that this is a very significant Christian idea. It's also a Hindu idea that friendship is at the heart of healing. Friendship is at the heart of spiritual renewal. Friendship is the practice of spirituality. I live in California, very close to Berkeley, not exactly in Berkeley, but very close. And today is one of those strangely very beautiful days in California. And I say strangely because with climate change, in the past, I would say at least a month and a half, it's been relentless rain. A few years ago, there was no rain, there was no water. And I'm from India, and the fact that you're living in a very dry climate that is not really a desert is mind boggling. But in the past few years, it's as if something has changed. You know, the switch got flipped, and all of a sudden we are having monsoon level rains. So the ground is soaked, everything is soaked. It's good to prevent the wildfires, but not so good because now there is ever present danger of flooding and you know, landslides and other things. We human beings live in such precarity anyway. But today the sun is shining brightly, and the birds are out. It's one of those absolutely gorgeous, stunning days that California is famous for. And I was reflecting on what I might say, or what I might be invited to say in this space as I was walking Air Dog. I will say Air Dog because he's not my dog; he's my neighbor's dog, and I care for him when they are out, and he's here. So we were walking. It was simply amazing to remember the value of friendship. And for me, friendship crosses species. This dog and I have a very intimate friendship. It's quite amazing. I talk about him all the time because he has revelatory power in my life. We have a favorite tree, and it's very interesting when I say to the dog, who's called Moses, by the way. That's the whole story behind that. But if I say to him, "Hey Momo," we call him Momo, let's go visit our tree, and he will head straight for that tree. And then standing under this tree, which is actually not very beautiful, but it looks very, very strong. It wants to live, and it will live. There is, at least I get that sense from that tree. And I was thinking, standing under that tree today with Momo, that my friendship with Carlos and Juan Carlos is similar. uh, we're not necessarily perfect in our friendship or care for each other by virtue of the distance that we live in, if for great part. But we are like that tree. The roots are deep, the branches are high, and we yearn and reach to the sky. So it's this kind of an invitation to a mutually intimate spirituality that inspired me to write a sentence for the book. Um, we were talking earlier how one sentences can be difficult to write because you have to distill a certain feeling, a certain idea, a certain sensibility into a few words so that it cuts across and sends a message anyway. I found that sentence very easy to write, and that is in and of itself a revelation. I found it easy to write because I felt, reading this book, that I was walking with the two of them. In fact, in many of these places, I was indeed walking with them. I was in Nairobi with them. We went to Kibera together. We went to Kilimanjaro together. Carlos and I had our own adventure, going above the clouds in a hot air balloon to look at the Kilimanjaro from about 4,500 feet up. And that was a truly spectacular experience and something that I will remember for the rest of my life. I think all I really want to say is this: if we are going to be looking for healing, especially the healing of the bleeding wounds of our bodies, of our minds, of our spirits, what we need to do is to follow the example of the one we call the Christ, which is he came to reconcile us to each other and to God and to the world in general. That is the manner of what we need to live and be in the world. I think Western thinking and Western theology is so given to one of my least favorite words, in the work that I do, which is agency. It so focuses on the individual. It so focuses on a certain kind of able-mindedness, able-bodiedness to act in the world. And I used to be called a third world woman, and agency is very important for these so called third world women. But more than that, if we don't want to fall into the lures of a Western episteme that in the end is actually quite limiting, we need to be embracing the intimacies of spiritual friendship. And only through this, I'm convinced, can we live in a very polarized, very divided world that is convinced that its view is absolutely right and everybody else is absolutely wrong. What if we were to enter into friendship, perhaps to reach even the levels of these two men and their respect and care and love for each other? What if we could reach across the aisles that divide us, and engender new life out of the things that formerly had the power to divide us? So let me stop there because I can I can talk a lot, but I'm really very eager to hear from everybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Now we'll give the floor to James. James Allison is a Catholic theologian and priest. He was raised in an Anglican family, but he converted to Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, at the age of 18. He has studied, lived, and worked in Mexico, Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, Spain, and the United States, as well as in his native England. Trained as a systematic theologian, he holds a doctorate in theology from the Jesuit faculty of Belo Horizonte, Brazil, Having lived as a Dominican monk between 1981 and 1995, he's currently a pastor, lecturer, and itinerant lecturer. He has contributed to disseminating René Girard's mimetic theory, to which he has also contributed the invaluable concept of the forgiving victim. He's also known for his firm but patient pastoral and theological insistence on the truthfulness of the gay issue as an ordinary element of Christianity. His books have been translated into several languages. Among other titles, I now want to highlight Jesus, the Forgiving Victim, Listening for the Unheard Voice, which will soon appear in a Spanish translation published by Alios Ventus Ediciones. Dear James, you're up.
Good. Am I audible?
Yes.
You are.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to take part. And again, as a personal matter, I would like to pay tribute to Carlos, whom I have known on and off since 1983, when he was a novice and I was a postulant. And then better in 1992, when he was organizing the general chapter of the Dominicans in Mexico City, or just outside Mexico City, and I was one of the translators. And then his immense kindness to me thereafter, when he invited me to come and give talks in the Cook in Mexico City, when he was in charge there, which were really enormous boosts to my attempt to be a theologian at a time when I had no ecclesiastical belonging. And it is in such moments that you discover real brothers, as opposed to the fake brothers that sometimes our religious belongings suggest that we have. So rather like Susan, I'm enormously grateful to the friendship that now is of many, many years with Carlos, in which I really owe him an enormous amount for his support, recognition, hospitality, and encouragement. So it was a real delight to see his work progressing and alongside Juan Carlos in their discussion together of these issues. One of the things that really interests me is, I think, and this is something which I'm going to have to refer to in, it's something which I hadn't picked up in the Spanish, but reading it again in English, it's something which Juan Carlos talks about the veiled self, or the self as a form of veiling. And I'm really interested to know more about that. And I'm really hoping that Juan Carlos will fill us in on that, because how the Ruah undoes and redoes us, which is obviously one of the themes of the book, undoes us and redoes us through friendship, while opening up and allowing us to share various forms of bodily pain spiritually, seems to be enormously important in any future discussion of belonging. And that's really the thing that I would like to pursue, is how is this Ruah producing belonging, a different sort of belonging? if you like, the sacred models of belonging, whereby we're insiders on a group with a sort of omerta and an agreement not to question the group's righteousness, are obviously collapsing all around us. I don't know whether you've followed this at all in the States, but I've noticed that there's been a row in the Southern Baptist congregation concerning an elderly pastor of theirs called Pressler, whose behavior is extraordinarily like that of several of the cardinals who Frédéric Martel discussed in his book Sodoma in Spanish. I think it's called The Power and Hypocrisy of the Vatican in English. But the extraordinary thing was that the mechanisms of cover-up were identical. The omerta associated with a false sort of belonging that was obviously incapable of dealing with the truth, the painful truth, being spoken by bodies that were attempting to love. So, that's one of the questions I want to ask. How do the authors reimagine belonging as part of the way we live spiritual lives as sisters and brothers who are discovering each other, especially since the obvious physical, geographical sorts of belonging are becoming much weaker, even when people do actually live quite close to each other. We find that their sources of input that give them a sense of belonging by social media or whatever are entirely different. How do we reimagine belonging, what I would call weak belonging, perhaps, given that strong belonging has been so obviously, turned out to be so dangerous? How do we imagine weak belonging as a healthy way of bearing witness to the presence of the Ruah in our midst? That's the if you like, the first question that I wanted to leave with my brothers, the authors.
You're muted.
Now
Thank
you
you.
are.
Here we are. So we can go with Juan Carlos, but if you want to interject something right now, Carlos, you can as well briefly do so. So Juan Carlos, then we go with you. Juan Carlos Lapuente-Tapia accompanies people and groups so that their actions for justice and peace are rooted in spiritual, theological, and ritual work in mutual accompaniment. A Peruvian theologian, he works hand by hand with the liberation theologian Gustavo Gutierrez for over a decade. His journey includes senior executive roles with human rights global organizations, churches, and interreligious platforms. He also teaches spirituality at the Warner Pacific University in Portland, Oregon, and collaborates with Lutherans in the Oregon Synod as bishops associates. Juan Carlos.
Okay. Do you hear me well there?
Very well.
Okay. Well, it's an honor to be with Susan, with James, and with Carlos here. I think my heart experienced a warm feeling, and I value that warm feeling to speak truth. So I think, the book is about friendship as like an experience of space in different ways that help us to speak truth and deconstruct and untie the different knots that are holding our pain. I think I consider myself also interesting myself, James, but it's about pain. Moving, I consider our journey, or my journey, but alongside many others, people who are in an exile of traditional forms of Christianity. Not because we know where we're heading, but because we are following Jesus' teachings, we are following the inspiration, the movement from Ruah, that is not an abstract movement. In the book, we talk and dialogue with Carlos, con mi hermano, that Ruah is pulling us, blowing us from the edges of society, from the invisible places for the hegemonic power right now. So because of that, because we feel challenged, because those edges or open wounds in the public sphere that are calling us, we are moving in an exile from traditional form of Christianity. So I think that's how I experienced this path, this journey, and we want to talk about that. I wanted to talk about that, and Carlos agitated me, and he wrote the first letter, and then I started responding back, like always, like you said, James. Carlos is like an instigator. Like how do you say, rekindling the fire, no, in us, in each of us. So Carlos, I'm very grateful that you do that, not only with me, but also with your students, the PhD students and others. So I like that this agitation brings thoughts and intuitions out of my heart and through the journey in my life. Susan, when thinking about, I don't know, talking about to Susan, but when thinking about Christ through our conversation in the book, well, Christ, the Messiah, no, but the anointed, it's just like so simple for me, like the anointed. So this being anointed by oil of the healing, of the presence of the Spirit, how we move out of this individualistic understanding of Christ and as the Christ as a superior experience, no, a superior figure, and how can we embrace more like the notion of being possessed by that anointing, no, anointment, unción. That's what I'm trying to say. Possessed by that presence of Ruah moving us and getting us into a new time and space, in a different experience of time and space. That is the time and space, not only from the edges of society, but also, how to say this, the expansion of our awareness when we experience the presence of our ancestors also, and future generations also. So the whole thing, this Christ presence is something that we get into that. We jump into that. But the journey is about mutual accompaniment. The whole transformation goes through mutual accompaniment, when we can speak truth and we can support one another through friendship to really untie the knots that are enclosing our deep rebellions, deep aspirations, hidden prayers. There are many ways to talk about this. So the book talks on all of this through letters with my friend, my hermano, Carlos. I like the question, James, how to reimagine belonging. I like the verb walking, caminando. Sometimes when I hear belonging, I hear like more like a community, like a center, a place. So you belong here, you belong there, You belong to us, you belong to them, we belong, I don't know. But when thinking about pathway, journey, pilgrimage, you belong to the pilgrimage, you belong to, we are walking together, this notion of sin o dos, no? Sin o dos. So I like this weak belonging, like a fragile intuition of where we should step to keep moving in this pilgrimage. So I think the question of how to reimagine belonging is very challenging also to keep exploring. What else to say here? I'm gonna use like a metaphor. It's not in the book, but I'm thinking about it. When I see a door that is old, specifically an old door, always the door moves and makes a lot of noise because it's old. The brackets, no, like something like that. And when we add some oil, the door like start like moving softly, and there's no noise. Everything moves smoothly. So being anointed, the Christian experience, the Christian journey should be something like people bringing that kind of oil in our communities. So even though there's frictions, even though there's rivalry, there's some way that we can untie the knots of that rivalry. So that's what I'm thinking about in this conversation with Carlos, how we get into another experience of time and space, even though when we lose the notion of our own self as a Juan Carlos narrative individual, that doesn't make any sense. It's just an illusion of a trap. It's just a trap. Okay, and then James, I like what, I would love to talk more about like how to say this, the self understood as a way in which this organism cries out psychologically, I'm not gonna suffer, I'm not gonna have more pain anymore. And the self is kind of like a defensive mechanism that encloses us, imprisons us. And I think being possessed by Ruah is about falling in love. So the self is falling, is like how do you say, breaking apart. And I think that is about the journey that we should join. Okay, well, no, I'm so happy being with you, and I just invite people to read the book and let's keep the conversation. There are terrible moments now in my life of experiencing so many difficult situations, and we know globally all this genocide and many other things. So I think our journey should be being anointed to keep resisting and re-existing in new ways. So this conversation is part of that for me. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. And finally, Carlos Mendoza Álvarez is a Mexican theologian of the Dominican order. Within critical thought on spirituality, he accompanies survivors of various forms of violence in dignified and hopeful resistance. He holds a doctorate in fundamental theology from the University of Freiburg in Switzerland, where he also obtained his habilitation. He was a member of the National System of Researchers until 2021 and has been a professor at the Pontificia Universidad de México, Universidad Pontificia de México, Pontifical University of Mexico, and the Ibero-American University, La Ibero. He has also been invited to teach at universities in Switzerland, Brazil, Colombia, the United States, and so on. And for 27 years, he has developed a fundamental theology in critical dialogue with modernity, where the phenomenology of subjectivity, mimetic theory, and the colonial thought converge in dialogue with the social movements of America. He has published 8 books and participated in 25 collected books. He has also published over 50 articles in various research journals, so I'm not going to read them all to you. But I want to bring some to the table. The resurrection as a messianic anticipation, grieving, memory, and hope from the survivor's perspective, which will soon be published by Alios Ventos Ediciones. Deus Ineffabilis, a postmodern theology of the end of times, published by Barcelona by Herder. Deus as conditus, desire, memory, and eschatological imagination, published in Paris by Seraph. And Deus Liberans, the Christian revelation in dialogue with modernity, the foundational elements of theological aesthetics, published in Freiburg in Editions Universitaires. He's currently developing a conception of tradition as performativity of faith from the resistance of the victims of systematic violence. And presently, he is a professor in the Department of Theology at Boston College and a member of the board of directors of the famous Concilium Theological Journal. Carlos.
Thank you so much, Juan Manuel. And I'm so happy to share with you, Susan, Juan Carlos, James, this moment. My heart is really plenty of life because of seeing you in the same virtual space and sharing with you this moment. So thank you so much for your availability to read the book and then to write some warbles in order to promote a little bit the content of this book on spirituality. I would like to say first that it's very difficult for me now to talk about spirituality because, as Juan Carlos mentioned, what we have been experiencing in the last months, the genocide in Gaza, but also the global war against immigrants, other wars in Congo, in Ukraine, and so on. It's so difficult to talk about hope, about spirituality, and this is a challenge for me as a believer, as a human being first, and then as a theologian. So I would like just to explore with you today a little bit, following your question, James, but also the comments made by Susan, about the concept that in some way are seeds in this book. One of them is friendship, of course. You mentioned, Susan, a very clearly way, and then mutuality, the second element, and then the Ruah, moving the peripheries, in the peripheries of the world. So I think the three elements in some way are like given a kind of a sense to this narrative that Juan Carlos and myself developed together during the pandemic. By the way, it's important just to say that in the first 2 years of the pandemic, in 21, 22, we were sharing some exchanges, but also we were visiting each other in Boston and then in Portland. First of all, talking about friendship, well, I would like to say that, as you said also, I met James almost more than 40 years ago, right? The first time. And we have been in different moments close to a communal project of belonging in some way, in a very weak way. In some times we have been also struggling together, trying to open some windows in the church for sexual diversity persons, for instance, but also other kinds of understanding of what human condition is about, right? So I'm really grateful to James Allison because this, your insights, your theological mind, and your courage as in some way a survivor of different kinds of violence, and I admire very much this kind of understanding of what is going on in these processes of scapegoating the others because they're different. So thank you, James, for your theology, of course, but also for your testimony, witnessing as a believer, as a Christian man. With Susan, so as you remembered, we have shared different moments, of course, in Concilium, the Journal of Theology, trying to update the spirit of the founders 50 years ago, listening carefully the modern world and how the church needs to open the windows to let come in some fresh air, right? So we were partners in this kind of conversation with our colleagues in the editorial board. And then, of course, the trip to Nairobi, the participation in the PACTPAN, the Pan-African Catholic and Pastoral, Theological and Pastoral Association, and then the trip to the safari, and then the experience looking for the Kilimanjaro. He was hiding in some way, right, in the clouds. So we were just trying to reach Kilimanjaro in the midst of an amazing moment that we share. Is a magical moment also in my life. It remains like one of the most beautiful moments of touching a little bit the mystery of creation, and then God's, of course, God, the creator. So with Juan Carlos, what can I say about friendship? Well, we met the first time 20 years ago in Santiago de Chile. It was an important institution where James Allison, you were lecturing too, trying to keep alive the work and the theology, the memory of Pedro de Cordova and the Dominicans in La Española in 16th century, trying to think about human condition in new terms, understanding that First Nations in the Americas were also human beings and defending their human rights, and then trying to think theologically in a different way. So we try to update that kind of spirit in the Instituto Pedro de Cordova, and Juan Carlos was a student there in the master's program on theology and social sciences. So the friendship that raised there at that time, 21 years ago, Juan Carlos is still there. We have been also exploring with other folks, with other friends, the mutual accompaniment process, listening our different stories of supporting people in vulnerable situations, facing or living in different kinds of peripheries, but looking for spirituality, strength, and dignity. So friendship has been for me like the source of my theological thinking and my theological work and my theological ministry. So I would say thank you, because of this friendship is part of my life. You help me to open my mind, my heart, my body, my experiences to the other represented by immigrants, by First Nations, by LGBTQ plus communities, of course, by other traditions, spiritual traditions. So for me, this is like the source of any spirituality who would like to really promote in some way a more inclusive world. Of course, I try to go back to my the heritage in the Dominican order, of course, Aquinas, but not forgetting Meister Eckhart, which is like one of the main voices in Western spirituality to approach the God as a mystery that never can be controlled, never can be in some way possessed. And that's another way also to address the issue of the self. We need to, in some way, experience a similar process like the kenotical process of the Logos becoming human being in the incarnation, and then this kind of depotentiation, divine depotentiation that Raymond Lull, for instance, used to talk about, is part of our experience of the self. The self needs to be in some way rejected, overcome. And Meister Eckhart used to say that if hell exists, in any case, there's only one inhabitant, the self. So I think following this apophatic tradition in the Dominican order, but also other spiritual traditions, of course, even in interreligious perspective, in Buddhism and so on, I think we can go back to the source of the spirituality. And of course, I would like also to highlight a little bit the wonderful artwork that has been prepared by Paulo Medina. And when you were asking about the self, there is one of the depictions here. It's about the plurality of the self. I think it's very important today to address the self in this very deconstructive way. I mean by that it's necessary to open the window to other identities, other experiences of the self, not only talking about individual self, but also collective. You were talking, James, about belonging, and I think it's the weak belonging. I like that expression because I think we need to, in some way, like explore this kind of continent of more interfaith experiences where every tradition has something important to say. So I would like just to also ask some questions to engage a conversation here. I think listening the other is an absolutely element necessary, first step to deconstruct the self. Listening the other, making room to the others, particularly the most vulnerable, but also the perpetrators. And if I've learned many things with you, James, about mimetic theory, but the role of the perpetrators and then the possibility of forgiveness and the conversion asked to the perpetrators is also a process. Javier Sicilia, the great Mexican poet, has been reflecting very deeply on that. What forgiveness means when we are in face of a perpetrator. What kind of conversion is needed for the perpetrator, but also the victim itself. And so I think it's important making room to this kind of acknowledgement. And I think the Truth Commission in Colombia particularly was exploring this very deeply in the past few years. 2 years ago, I don't remember exactly, James, we were in Bogota together at the cover annual meeting, and then we were listening people who were involved in violence, in military or paramilitary violence, and then reflecting on their own process of conversion, and then also the victims. So how can we learn from that process to create a kind of inter-self? I don't know if that is a right word in English, but a kind of an open self to the others, and the importance of really including the process of conversion for everybody, perpetrators, but also the victims, going beyond resentment, probably as you, in a very, very extraordinary manner, you have developed, James, in your theology. So I think improving these kind of networks of weak belonging in some way is that what many communities are exploring. Communities of victims, for instance, the families, the relatives of the disappeared people in Mexico, that we listened carefully. You remember, Juan Carlos and Susan, we were together last summer in Guadalajara at the Jesuit University, the ITESO, in that wonderful experience, workshop and festival Reexiste. Yes. That was a moment to listen carefully the others, in particular those who are facing in the peripheries structural violence, systemic violence. And I think they taught us at that time that it's important to acknowledge suffering and the wounds, and connecting wounds to the wounds, our personal wounds to the wounds of the other. But they insisted a lot that it was absolutely crucial and relevant to celebrate life. In the midst of the rubble, we would say that global war, global violence is in some way spreading out all over the globe. So how can we celebrate life? How would the victims, they do that, the families of the relatives, or women together supporting each other against femicide or patriarchy. So this kind of conspiration, not conspiratory sense, but conspiration in the etymological sense, that's the source of our understanding of becoming the body of Christ. We need to receive the same spirit, conspiratio, right? And I think, and that's probably my question to all of us here is, how can we improve this kind of way back to the communal, to the political, in this spiritual sense? What kind of inspiratio, conspiratio, because it's the breathing process, right? That every human being, every creature, and as believers, we think also that the Spirit of God is in some way coming to us and going out also from us, our experiences. How can we improve this kind of inter-self? Just to mention an expression that could be useful. But anyway, Once again, I really appreciate your presence here. And I think the book is about this, listening each other, writing letters in a very difficult moment, as the pandemic it was, and then trying to share our insights. Every one of us, every individual, every person has a particular spiritual experience of the self and the limits of the self, the violence that we have been provoking or receiving. And in that way, I think we are also like part of the coming out of the spirit in the world. Listening to the peripheries, the people living in the peripheries, for me, has been a source of strength, a challenge also to understand and to, in some way, problematize my own life, my own privilege, my own self. And then at the same time, it's like an invitation, a very friendly way to going away from my very selfish way of understanding who I am. And then when I feel welcomed by the other and then invited to go beyond my own limits, then I started a new life. And it's with you that I've been discovering this. So thank you so much for this opportunity to continue this conversation in this book, but I'm sure in other processes we will be sharing in the future years. Thank you.
Thank you all. And well, we are welcoming your questions if you are watching this live on either Facebook or YouTube. You can post your questions or your comments using the chat, and they'll be very welcome. While they arrive, and we have some more, let me thank you all for this dialogue on turn of the reimagination of weak belonging, as James has called it tonight. And this is a very interesting form of participation, which I suppose is in contrast to perhaps strong belonging that would amount to partisanship, to party building, to one single gospel for the party, say, and an inverted gospel of sorts. And then I'm thinking about nationalism and all these trends that lead us to partisanship and soon, very soon, end up in violence. So I suppose that the sort of unselfing that we're discussing as a necessary step towards the recognition of the other is in contrast with the Roman version of peace, the Pax Romana, which is all about making cities explode and being the strong holder of a quite relative peace. So this leads us directly towards one of the central topics, perhaps, of the mimetic theory, which is sacrifice. And in the contemporary world, who must be sacrificed for the cause of the state or the well-being of wealthy people and such things. So this book comes as a fresh oasis amidst a generalized context of violence and the tiredness of generalized violence of our institutions, such as democracy, around the world in a big year of elections. What sort of thing can one do if one's a reader who just found us to start walking towards this sort of belonging, towards this sort of accompaniment that's mutual and that can perhaps give us that courage, that strength, that vivacity that some of the big things of which we have been talking about hold. So And this is an open question to you all, because you are all very intelligent people, but also people who are engaged in the social strife.
Okay, well, some thoughts. Let's start that. And I cannot avoid saying, Carlos, thank you so much. You talk from your heart always. You just arrive and start like praising James and praising Susan, praising, like you're like a mirror of a free mirror. So it is very beautiful always to notice that. Okay, so related to the question, I think, or the topic, I think violence, the horror is about somebody's crying out their own pain without dealing with it. Somebody is crying out, we want to survive, and we don't want to have any more pain in our lives, so we need to destroy you. This notion of is growing in globally. I think there's a pain, tremendous pain, ancestral pain, much pain, horrible pain that we are carrying in our bodies without the capacity to deal with it. And that's the explosion of tremendous violence, rivalry, scapegoating, and how the notion of being superior than others is getting more place. It's having more. We can see it, and we can see the teeth of that. So yeah, I met you, James, when was the theoretic mimetic theory conference in Mexico City, and also in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas in, I don't remember when, 2011, something like that, 2011, 2012. And this, what Carlos is saying about the perpetrator, I think the perpetrator is imprisoned by their own pain, is a victim of fear. And how can we deconstruct that? How can we free somebody from that trap? I think we can do it if we experience that freedom out of our own defensiveness, pain. Also, what is the awareness, the trans-historical consciousness that we need to be awake in, so we can understand that our pain is not individual pain. It's the pain of the cosmos body, the pain of Christ's body, it's the pain of humanity, nature, crying out for freedom. And I think the pilgrimage is about getting into this notion of simultaneous presence that we talk in the book, through conversation with Carlos, another way of understanding perichoresis and all of that, simultaneous presence. I think people who want to walk in mutual accompaniment, I think like people need to experience that the need or the aspiration to walk lighter. I like this weak belonging, James. Lighter. Let's say, like, do the hard work to become lighter. The hard work of joy, pleasure, and get us free. I was like the other day with a Buddhist sangha talking and in dialogue with a lama about that 2 days ago. So And then last piece I want to say, maybe in this, that the effort of dialoguing through letters in the book, I think is something that I would like to see, how we bring theology back to the epistolar dimension among communities at the edges of society, or exploring and discerning how communities can dialogue from their own experience, how they are finding light and experience Ruah moving them, how theology could be this dialogue among communities instead of just people discussing about topics that who knows what are they talking about. So I really, really value the theologians that are here in the room. I always feel like who am I to be here? So I know, Carlos, you dialogue, you make colloquios, the same, James, Susan, no? So I really value you as a theologians, and I want to keep walking with you. So thank you. You want to invite somebody?
I'm curious to listen to you, Susan. Of course, James too.
Well, I was just sitting here thinking, I wish Carmen Margarita were here. Because, peripheries also have peripheries. And I don't know what it is about us human beings. Maybe it's part of our, mammalian makeup. We are given to creating forms of hierarchy, which we then enforce through violence. And as women, we get it from everybody, to say it very simply, including our own liberation brothers and sisters, other sisters. So how do we continue to, and just to say, I'm also very nervous about, I continue to be nervous about the language of victimhood, because I think it reinscribes a positionality that is paralyzing.
Mm-hmm.
So how not to do that while also not falling into the trap, as you were saying earlier, Juan Carlos, of the self that is very powerful. Carlos also, what a lovely image. In hell, there is the self. In hell, there is the ego, because sometimes the self is important. In hell, there is the ego. How not to fall into that trap of the agential ego that is able to wrestle and be heroic in the face of suffering, and to come up with a very different way to hear, to listen, to act, and to be. So I don't think we have an answer yet. I mean, there are intuitions, and I particularly like you raising up the force of art, Carlos, because I think it really only happens through a sense of creating beauty, and it has to be an interruptive, transgressive, or to use a word that in the United States is now a little bit dangerous, an insurrectionist form of the beautiful. So I'm just sitting here wishing Carmen Margarita were here. I miss that friend with whom also I felt living in accompaniment for just a brief period in Guadalajara, that only together can we face these forms of unbelonging that are foisted, especially on women, but also for people whose identities are marginalized or considered quote unquote impure by somebody, something, some power. So I'm just sitting with some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for mentioning Carmen Margarita, because she prepared the foreword in this book. So it's an amazing text talking about her understanding of spirituality, how the Ruah is inspiring the communities they belong to them. She belongs to them. So I think it's a very important mention. Thank you.
One of the things I've noticed recently, and I'd be interested to know how you react to this, is that at the same time as the sacrificial violent has become more and more evident, and indeed, what's the word? A parody of itself in its violence. A huge number of, especially young people, without any particular association of this with anything formally religious, seem to have a much better understanding, fairly instinctively, of how the scapegoating mechanism works and how to undo it. Is that something that you're finding as well, or is that just my imagination? An amazingly diverse array of people who are automatically picking up that just simply being a decent person requires undoing this kind of way of living. And in one sense, that's made the anger and the violence that Juan Carlos described even more violent and more of a parody of itself. I was thinking of just Trump last night threatening everybody with what he's going to do when he's a dictator, as though he has to ratchet it up the whole time in the hopes of getting people riled up, because more and more people are saying, I'm not going to bite the temptation to get caught up in that. Is that my imagination? Is there some sign of Ruah actually spreading genuine Catholicity, as it were? Not necessarily within religious channels, but wider in our society. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
In some way, it makes sense to me because working with the students here in Boston College and discussing sometimes these kind of political issues in the context of polarization in the US, the coming presidential elections, I think they represent, the young students, a new generation that they are tired of this kind of polarization that they experience every day in their home, their families, in the school, and they are like, in a more instinctive way, probably trying to create different kinds of relationships and trends and networks who are far away from this polarization. Promoting, for instance, some kinds of clubs and networks here in the university or with people around, and then trying to improve different understanding of what human condition is about, trying to also celebrate life in a very fragile way, because we are aware today about the fragility of life because of climate change and many other issues. But I think they are following a different path, and I would say also that they are probably open to the spirit, the Ruah, crossing peripheries in a new way. They're looking for a kind of spirituality, but not related to religious traditional institutions, but in a different way, more interreligious, interfaith, or ecological. And I think the new generation in some way is exploring new paths towards spirituality and then rethinking the self in a different way. Many of them, of course, they don't, and they are not really following this path. They are in some way nourishing the opposition, but I think the most sensitive students here, they are trying to open new windows to this communal path towards a new way of becoming humans.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I will add, James, the notion of parish, the notion of congregation, the notion of sangha, the notion of, so what a spiritual community looks like. I see more and more through mutual accompaniment. We have been working with Carlos with many other people in the last 8 years. So we keep doing it with people from different countries. And I understand that there are people like the sense of belonging to a spiritual fabric, right? It's a spiritual fabric. You can name one person, and that person is connected with, I don't know, 35 people that kind of like nurture in some way. So there's no need of this strong sense of belonging to an institution. It's more like how they nurture a spiritual social fabric, and in that fabric they exercise their friendship, leadership. So I think there's another component of networks, fabrics, socials, that how we think, what institutional dimension looks like within those social spiritual fabric. I think that's my experience with leaders and young people, like the sense of multi-group sense of belonging, but always there's one spiritual social fabric that they are nurturing and they need to support. They are supported by as well.
Yes, in relation to what James asked, those of us who live in the United States are, I would say, at the edge of despair constantly in the face of the kind of vulgar spectacles of political violence that is foisted on us almost every day. I mean, reading the news is traumatic because you never know what you're going to read on any given day. What I find as seeds of hope and signs of the Spirit's work is people are yearning for, I would say, for the noise to die down so that we can hear suffering. I have Republican friends. You know, it's funny to say that in this space. And there are people in many parts of this country that feel very, very resentful and angry because they feel that their fair share has been taken away by a false politics of inclusion. Now, I'm as left as they come. I am a Marxist feminist, so I'm not defending anybody. But what I'm saying from the perspective of somebody who is an administrator in a complex institution with different kinds of committed people, that you begin to develop a ear for what is the story behind what is being actually said. And behind that story is, I would say, very human things, a sense of entitlement. You know, my grandfather was a coal miner. You know, we worked ourselves up from absolute poverty. That's a very common story to hear in these parts. And just because I'm white, I'm being excluded, etc., etc. So what the opportunist in the political sphere is doing is to drum up a politics of enmity. And what we need to do, I think, again, I mean, as an administrator, I have certain power, obviously, is to create the conditions for fostering friendship. And that's why I go back again to the idea of the intimacy of friendship. Because in that friendship, maybe I could hear the same person who's talking about his white grandfather who was a coal miner and who brought his family up from poverty is also a gay man and who possesses wounds that are not immediately obvious to the rest of us. So I mean, he self-disclosed, so I understand these are real people I'm talking about. So how can the politics of friendship, and I say politics of friendship, dilute possibly the politics of enmity that the opportunists are taking every advantage of on a global scale?
And what is the pedagogy for friendship instead of a pedagogy of terror, no, like feminist thinkers?
Rita Segato, yeah.
Yeah. A pedagogy of friendship for.
You mentioned made me think about the story of in the Maya countryside of Chiapas, the story of a paramilitar called El Chenchulin. And a good friend of mine, Conrado Cepeda, when he was a missionary there, told me the story that what happened. He was one of the most terrible paramilitaries in the region. He was responsible of the assassination of many people, particularly men, leaders of different families. And the day arrived when one of his daughters was assassinated in a very tremendous way. So he got depression for several years, and he stopped like committing some assassination, but he was like destroyed as a human being for 2 or 3 years, as far as I remember. And then the elders in the community went to visit him and telling him, "You are part of us. Until you will be healed, the community will stay sick in some way. So we need you to come back and to heal, because the community will be healing also if you are healing." And so in the beginning, he refused to be acknowledged, to acknowledge the crimes he had committed, and then to be back to the community. But several months later, he came back to the elders in the community and said, "Yes, I would like to come back." But started a process of 2 or 3 years of ministering, accompanying the catechists of the community, visiting the communities, taking care of other families, offering them food for several years, which represents a lot of work, a double kind of job tasks, everyday life. And then, after a process of conversion in some way, they celebrate the forgiveness process, like the conclusion of this process, and then he was welcomed back to the community. And I like very much this story because it's about we belong each other, but we don't acknowledge that. We don't understand many times. We are refusing the others because they are like a threat for ourselves. So as somebody who has been suffering violence, of course, but also the perpetrators. And so we need to probably go back to this kind of mutual awareness of who we are. And I think that's an important path towards the community of the self, I would say, right? In a more communal way, talking about who we are.
Self as a we. You let me thinking of why perhaps this late generation are so capable of realizing the structural violence that oppresses us, and they're very sensitive to it, and therefore they are also very sensitive to the sacrificial forms of Christianity, the violent forms of Christianity that have contributed to crimes and what have you, to evil. purposes. So we have a question from Gabriel Garcia Jolie that I think intersects very well with the discussion. There seems to be such hunger for spirituality, so much righteous indignation and desire for social justice, so much eagerness to belong to loving communities. Yet churches, except the most traditional ones, remain getting older, emptier, and ever more socially irrelevant. Why then is Christianity, and especially liberal Christianity, so unable to build new forms of belonging and even to maintain the old ones and ease so much underlying pain?
Yes. Oh, I resonate a lot with that question because I think so. What is also part of the conversation about the agency, our agency, collective agency. I think institutions, churches see themselves just as a memory, but I think we need to look at our collective efforts as creative memory. This is all a creative memory. I'm not saying forgetting, but creating. And creating is creating out of nothing. So at the same time, that's challenge. That's challenge. That's the challenge, the tension. There's a memory, but that memory should awakes something new, an ongoing thing, an ongoing tradition, like Congar, no, the translation of love, but not translation as the same thing said it differently. It's not that. It's other thing constantly, other thing, other. So I think the trap of our churches or churches, religious institutions in different way is like they don't see people as creative agency with creative agency to re-exist. That we are working on this with the festivals and all of that, the workshop with Carlos, to resist and re-exist, the creative collective agency that people have. So the way we do theology, the way we do understand this notion of sacraments, how we open up everything for the collective creative agency to resist and re-exist. And I think that's something that I'm committed to keep exploring and working on this. I remember now, like just like to add, Aquinas said Eucharistia, no, the blossoming friendship, Eucharistia. So that's the main, how to say, density of the presence of the divine through friendship. But at the same time, friendship can be one person assimilating other, one group assimilating other. So how we can see our woundedness, but at the same time, the potentiality about creative memory. Thank you, Gabriel.
Dear Susan or James, do you want to react to this question?
I live in the what I call the liberal mecca of the universe, which is Berkeley, California. Even in the United States, many people call us Berserkly, because the individualism is rife here. I regularly inveigh against the habits that are so carefully curated and cultivated by this particular orientation to individualism in the world. And if any of my students or colleagues are listening to this, you will hear this is a refrain that I constantly bring up. I identified 5 C's, words beginning with the letter C, that I think are habits that are cultivated that really then are unable to hold communal issues in view. And these habits are the habit of wanting choice all of the time, And I keep saying choice is expensive. Think about it. I mean, I know feminists will immediately go to the one place where choice matters, which is bodily autonomy. And that's the better word for it, or better idea for it, is bodily autonomy, not choice. So choice is expensive, choice is extractive. Or how about the headlong desire for comfort? Everything about our economies, especially in the Western world, promise us comfort. So where is the shortcut? Where is the way in which I am least bothered by what is required of me? Choice and comfort are extractive. How about the kind of consumptive habits that we live with? Nothing is ever enough. There's always need for more. You have one car, you need two cars, you need three cars, you need a bigger car, you need a more efficient car, etc., etc. We live in a heavily consumptive environment, also therefore extractive. It cares nothing about its impact in the world. Competition. I mean, in this part of the world, everybody wants to be Top Gun. Everybody wants to be Top Gun. I regularly have in my office students who are incensed that they do not get an A in their class. How can every class, every professor, for every paper give you an A? What is that? But that kind of thing is we are habituated to that, thinking about ourselves as A material all of the time, everywhere. And the final thing, I think, which is very rife in my part of the world, here in the United States, is that we are constantly fed a diet of the circus. We are so distracted by little widgets and gadgets and this, that, and the other. We are not focusing on what is happening to the interbeing or interself that Carlos was talking about. We're not focusing on that because we are, how to say, this is the pedagogy that leads to the politics of enmity. And I would say undoing all of these, to be discomforted, to have no choice, to live with no choice, to not consume as much, to be not competitive, to not be distracted by the circus, is what you were asking for, Juan Carlos, as a pedagogy of friendship.
Very well. So I think that we've come to the end of this meeting, which is sad, really, because I would like to stay here with you talking about this for a few more hours and maybe share a whiskey with you, because tonight is Burns night, and we shall celebrate. Anyways, well, this is the end. So it's time for you to give us your final remarks. Susan.
I would like to start saying.
Go on. Go ahead.
For me, this is a very interesting conversation. Of course, I would be excited to continue this conversation. Probably new letters coming through email, and then imagine together something new. We have been creating a great conversation about a very important topic, which is spirituality in these times of horror, of polarization. And I think that the people in the peripheries, not only socio-economical peripheries, but also existential peripheries and religious peripheries, they are creating networks to resist, to re-exist in some way, in a very generous way. And I think we need to listen carefully to those peripheries and those communities and be part of this process. Because I think it's seen as a gift coming from those who are the most fragile and vulnerable, but at the same time who are open to the power of the divine Ruah, which is all the time dancing with us in some way, inviting us, welcoming us to this divine dancing. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Yes, I'm sure this is the seed for various conversations and for further explorations. Would anyone go next? James, go ahead.
Yes. Well, yes, and I'd like to thank you very much for this conversation, because I noticed just how difficult it is to let go of the painful pleasure of being caught up in being riled up by all the noise, which you have described, and Susan, which you've described as well. Because it's the noise, it is terribly painful, and yet somehow it seems preferable to falling into the nothingness that is God, and discovering ourselves being brought into being in ways which we can't control. So to join with you in listening to people who are undergoing the same and feeling that we're sharing this adventure is a great privilege. And thank you very, very much indeed for sharing this time.
Okay, I will do it. So you have the last main voice, Susan. Well, there's no friendship without eating in the kitchen of your friend. So I want to highlight that Carlos prepared good breakfast in different moments in my life, and Susan, I had the opportunity to be at Susan's house in Berkeley, close to Berkeley, and she cooked a delicious fish. And so, yeah, I leave this meeting with the question: how we work for a pedagogy of friendship, a pedagogy of discernment, bringing back the capacity to discern, sift wisdom, to keep holding hope and untying our own memories creatively. I think our friendship should be in some way how we support one another, how we untie our memories to be open up for the movement of life and acknowledging one into another. This notion of Christianity has a very good notion of this perichoresis, how we really incarnate that life, embody that life. What means the pedagogy of discernment, pedagogy of friendship, and do the hard work to have pleasure, do the hard work to have a lighting life, lighter. I think what Susan was saying. Yeah, and please keep praying for me as I keep praying for you. Thank you so much.
I just want to say thank you all for this great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Carlos, and of course, Alios Ventos, Juan Manuel, all the editors. You're muted.
Thank you very much for this lovely conversation, the first of many to come about these books. And finally, I want to remark that this is a very good translation by Jolly Joy. So we're very thankful for their work. Thank you.
Yes, Jolly.
Yes. And finally, I have some very brief parish announcements. We invite you to visit the Alios Ventos Ediciones website, aliosventos.com, and to follow us on our social networks, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just look for Alios Ventos and you'll probably spot us right away. Mutual Accompaniment in the Divine Ruah on Discernment and Spirituality for Uncertain Times by Carlos Mendoza Álvarez and Juan Lapuente-Tapia, illustrated by Paulo Medina and prologued by Carmen Margarita Sánchez de León, is on sale both in print and in digital formats worldwide, including Mexico. Like most of our books from the Alios Ventos, published by Alios Ventos, you can download the first publication of the collection of the spirituality, which is this one, in a digital edition for free from aliosventos.com. There you will find both the English and the Spanish versions if you care for the Spanish version. You can also find the publications of Alios Ventos Ediciones on Google Play Books, Book Depository, Amazon, and Kindle globally. In Mexico, you will find them in the online stores of El Sótano, Sanborns, and Gandhi, or by writing to us through our social networks. You will find the paperback and the hardcover print-on-demand versions of Alios Ventos books. We also invite you to help us publish Alios Ventos' upcoming titles. That's how we can give them to you for free if you help us that way. And the upcoming titles are The Resurrection as a Messianic Anticipation, Grieving, Memory, and Hope from the Survivor's Perspective by Carlos Mendoza Álvarez in Leslie Pascal's translation. Jesús, La Víctima Perdonadora, The Forgiving Victim in translation as La Víctima que Perdona by Ángel Méndez and Pablo Soler Frost. They helped translate the book, and they did brilliant work at that. And Nietzsche y el sentido trágico del sufrimiento by Víctor Ignacio Coronel Piña. Those are the upcoming titles of our collection of philosophy and theology. Then we have also, besides these non-fiction titles, some fiction titles coming up. Inmóvil, Yerto and Destrozado, y Destrozado, Diario de Miguel III by Pablo Soler Frost, fabulous novel. Fabulario by Guillermo Callejas, and La Naturaleza del Amor by Miguel Abraham. And finally, we'll soon publish Sabor Mortal by the award-winning poet and translator Mario Murga. So to help us keep the feast for free, you can join us on bringing some things to the kitchen, which is money. We need money, if that wasn't clear. Thank you very much. Thank you all. This has been a spectacular conversation. So many things are nevertheless left over the table for us to meet again and continue chatting about this. Thank you very much, and thank you for accompanying us, those who are watching us now and those who will see this in the future. Have a good day, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you.